Welcome to the weekly podcast from the Huffines Institute for Sports Medicine and Human Performance. I'm your host, Tim Lightfoot, and I'm so glad that you took the time to download us and that you're watching us. Every week we bring you an interesting person in the world of sports medicine, and the COVID-19 virus has not stopped us yet. If you've been watching, you know we've been focusing on the COVID-19 virus and how you can exercise during the pandemic. And if you haven't seen any of these, at least you can go to the link that's right down here on the bottom of the screen, and that's where you can get the guidelines for exercise during the pandemic from the American College of Sports Medicine. And we certainly recommend that you be active, and that will help build your immune functioning during this difficult time. But probably like most of you, we've kind of gotten tired of seeing virus coverage. We want to talk about something else, something that's more science related and certainly that's more fun. We certainly all could use a little bit more fun right now. And so we're really pleased this week to start to bring you some of these more fun podcasts. We're bringing back an old-time guest that we've had with us. Now, we've had him on 3 of our audio podcasts. Matter of fact, he was our first audio podcast way back in 2010 when we started doing these podcasts. And so we are so happy to bring Dr. Jim Fluckey back with us on the podcast. Welcome to the video podcast, Jim.
So happy to be here. Thanks again. Looks like a 10-year anniversary here, so this is kind of fun.
Absolutely. We thought we'd let people see what you look like so they can match the voice with the face. Again, I'm going to tell them a little bit about you, Jim, and then we'll just jump into our fun conversation today. And I would bet, well, they've seen the title of the podcast by now, so they probably have an idea what's coming. But we'll let them be surprised. So Dr. Fluckey is currently a professor of kinesiology and health and kinesiology here at Texas A&M University. He has a bachelor's degree from Eastern New Mexico University. He got his master's degree from the famous lab at Ball State, and then he has his PhD from Penn State. He has, as I said, he's been with us on 3 audio podcasts, including our number 1 podcast, number 94, and number 226. He has been president of the Texas American College of Sports Medicine on that executive board. He is also the chair of the advisory board for the Huffines Institute for Sports Medicine. So he's very involved with the Huffines Institute. He has over 60 scientific publications, primarily in the area of protein turnover in muscle, how you make muscle grow or how you make it shrink, either one. But, you know, you can see those other podcasts if you want to hear him talk about that. I asked him to come on today to talk about a special class that he teaches every once in a while. We have the option as professors to teach special seminars, and Dr. Fluckey has taught a particular seminar that it just goes over really, really well with the students, and it's the exercise physiology of superheroes. And so, Jim, I think probably people are going, what? That's really a course? They're really teaching that, and to doctoral students, no less. So let's start off by telling the audience a little bit about why you came up with this idea for a course, and so what purpose does it serve?
Well, to make a long story sort of short, I am always looking for ways to teach graduate students in a manner that they are eager to learn, okay? And having a bunch of doctoral students in the group, they have had opportunities to learn a lot of physiology along the way. The title of the class is The Physiology of Superheroes. And, but often we're not allowed to, or they're not given this latitude to actually flex the intellectual muscle that they have learned about. And so what this class does is kind of lures them into trying to figure out or make plausible the physiology of superheroes, and that's the outward intent. But my intention for this whole thing is that in order for them to better describe physiology of superheroes, they have to go back and fundamentally understand human physiology in order to know what can be plausible and what's not plausible. And so what I do is these students come in and I let them pick a superhero of their choice within reason. You know, they can't fly. We still haven't been able to physiologically figure out how things fly without wings, but a superhero that they admire. And then I tell them, okay, you need to figure out a way to plausibly tell me how this physiology works, to where something has changed in their bodies that can be explained. And they're like, yeah, fantastic idea. Well, once they begin to really dive into this, they realize that, in order for me to better explain physiology of a superhero, I better fundamentally understand the physiology that's going on in the human body. And so what I do is lure them into literally going back and learning more and more about the physiology and understanding it fundamentally so well that they can come and tell me then what makes this superhero plausible or not plausible. And even if it's not all that plausible, they have to figure out a way that they can alter physiology to make that superhero a superhero. I was trying to ponder how to really explain this, but a lot of us are at home right now, and I grew up in construction trades, and ultimately, when I'm at home, I have to do it yourself stuff at home, right? I have to do that. And the way I can maybe better explain this is, let's say you're looking online and you find a brand new fancy dancy ceiling fan with a special remote control, and you just got to have that, okay? And so you order it and you get it. Well, electricians can't come out to your home. And so you're like, you know what? There are a lot of people all the time, do it yourselfing, they can install a ceiling fan. And so you might actually start to dive into that. You look at the instructions and then realize, oh, wait, you might have an unfortunate circumstance where you might get a little bit of a shock out of a wire, and you go, wait, whoa, time out here. I'm missing something. And so when you're missing something, what do? You go back and you begin to research, okay, what am I missing? Then you find out that the power comes into the home and it goes through a fuse box. And this fuse box can disconnect and disperse all the electric throughout your system. So now I got to turn off a fuse. And then I go in and learn how wiring circuits work so that I can better understand how to put in a ceiling fan, okay? And then ultimately I can put in a ceiling fan. And what I'm doing with superhero physiology is that in order for you to understand how the superhero works, you have to go back in and do all the research on what makes a regular human being work in order for you to understand better what's going on with this superhero. And
I do want to say before we get going, you're not advocating for people how to learn about electricity by getting a shock.
No, and in fact, I probably should have opened with that. But there are a lot of people who do learn by accident that there is electricity going through wires, and they better know how to shut them off. No way am I advocating that.
As a matter of fact, we're asking that if you are putting in a ceiling fan, please know about basics about electricity before you do that, for sure.
Yeah, and so the advantage here with a lot of doctoral students taking this is that they do know the basics of physiology. And I'm giving them an opportunity then to flex that intellectual muscle to see if they can figure out what makes a superhero work. The first time I taught this class, this will be the third iteration. The first time I taught this class, one of my grad students picked, or one of the grad students picked her superhero and raced over to the library to find out everything that they could or she could about this superhero. And as she was coming out of the library, she was met with one of our more distinguished professors. They were just passing by, and he asked her, "What are you doing?" She goes, "Oh, I'm getting reference materials for this new class I'm taking." He goes, "Oh, that sounds really exciting. What do you got there?" And she pulls out probably 25 different comic books that she checked out from our library. And he's like, "What is this all about?" Well, lo and behold, I got an email from that professor asking me what in the heck I'm doing, because this just doesn't sound reasonable for a graduate class. And once I explained to them that I can actually get these students to learn more about physiology in this 16 weeks, outside of the traditional norms of textbook stuff, I think he was actually rather impressed that this opportunity availed itself to these grad students. And it's a well-attended class. They love it. But when they walk away at the end of the day, they understand more about regular human physiology than you ever thought you would get without actually studying the human physiology overtly. It's very covertly done. And anytime I can excite a student to learn more about what we're trying to teach them, even though it's under the disguise of learning about superhero physiology, I feel like it's mission accomplished.
Well, I would agree with you, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to chat with you today. Because again, we're talking about the fun side of things and how, and so many of us, most of us learn more when we're having fun. By the way, if you'll notice my background, I'll move out of the way a little bit. We've got, we're in Iron Man's workshop here, so you can tell us one of my favorite superheroes. Let's talk about some of yours that have come up in class. I know that you and I were talking a little while ago about some of the more prominent examples, realizing that now on this podcast, in which we mentioned these, your students in the upcoming semester can't use these because you've talked about them. Let's talk about the Hulk. That was one you mentioned.
Yeah, so it's always really entertaining to try to explain physiology of a human being that can, quadruple or even go 5 to 10 times their muscle mass in a matter of minutes just because they're feeling outrage. And it's been rather interesting. My laboratory really is focused on how to make muscle grow, as you mentioned earlier in this podcast. And so, near and dear to many of the students who are drawn to this type of class, they want to understand how muscle grows too. So tackling how a human being can just have a huge increase in muscle mass is something that might be physiologically plausible if you have a number of other variables that you can enter into this whole concept. And what I mean by that is we don't limit the physiology that's plausible to just human physiology. Okay. And what I'm saying there is that there are X-men who can deliver electrical shocks. And so students have looked and studied and researched how electric eels can generate an electrical shock and what it would take to insert that into a human being and give them that same capability. When it comes to the Incredible Hulk, what you're asking the Incredible Hulk to do is turn on all of its anabolic machinery to make it grow at an extremely high rate. The problem with that in general is that the amino acids and the amount of substrates that are available to lead to that huge increase in mass, the Hulk would have to be eating massive meals as fast as possible to support the growth. Well, one of the grad students came up with the concept that perhaps the reason that the Hulk turns green is because he has chlorophyll and chloroplast physiology in his being.
Oh, now that's clever. No, that's clever. That's something I had not thought about. That would help deal with energy. Yeah.
You bet. So they can take the radiated energy from the sun and reduce that CO2 and by reduce those carbons by making amino acids, making carbohydrates, which would literally support that massive growth in a very short period of time. And I love it that the later iterations of the Avengers movies, you would have the Black Widow trying to calm down Bruce Banner or the Hulk. And always she would say, the sun is setting, the sun is getting low, which also, with the exception of maybe one or two situations, the Hulk comes out during the day, which you would want, right? For somebody who would need to reduce those carbons to make amino acids and carbohydrates at a time when this individual is trying to gain size. And the other parts are easy, more muscle mass, more physiologic cross-sectional area of mass, the stronger the muscle can perform. And so those are some of the more simple things that you can explain when it comes to the Incredible Hulk. You just have to figure out how to add all that mass in a very short period of time. And I think using chlorophyll or using the whole concept of taking ultraviolet energy or radiative energy and literally reducing carbons, that's a pretty interesting approach to that.
That was a very imaginative approach. I bet that student got an A that semester.
Yeah, well, I don't tell anybody, but I heard I'm a pretty easy A anyway. But yeah, that student definitely got an A.
Yeah. So let's go from the growth aspect to a recovery aspect. One of the other ones that you said was your favorite story was Wolverine. Tell the folks a little bit about Wolverine that may not be as familiar with Wolverine.
Well, Wolverine, is one of the X-Men, and it he's one of these guys that has gotten a lot of attention due to the X-Men movies and then X-Men Wolverine. And then when you hire an actor named Hugh Jackman to play that role, it certainly lends a lot of credibility to the role. And
that's like hiring Professor Jim Fluckey at Texas A&M. It brings a lot of attention to that. Yeah.
I was actually going to say Dr. Tim Lightfoot, who happens to be sitting in Iron Man's laboratory right at the moment. But with Wolverines, I think a lot of attention gets focused on his adamantium skeleton, which allows him to bring these spikes out, and that makes him somewhat of a superhero. But really, his superpower, so to speak, is the ability to heal. He can repair himself almost as quickly as he gets damaged, which is why he, in the first iterations, he starts way back in the Civil War, and then you see him in World War I, and see him in World War II, and then ultimately he becomes, the X-Men of an X-Men. But because he has this capacity and ability to repair, it means that the turnover of his cells and the ability for his cells to still turn over is still very active in that individual. And so then you have graduate students trying to focus on how to control protein turnover. How can you turn it up, turn it down, and allow this Wolverine to execute this really fast repair anytime he's damaged. And even when the spikes come out of his hands, when they go back into his hands, that skin repairs itself. They never tell you it's not painful for him. But his ability to repair is what makes him even allowed to have that skeleton in his body. And so students interested in Wolverine, and like Hulk to some extent, are really focused on mechanisms of protein turnover, looking at the rates of protein synthesis versus degradation, the ability to recycle all the intermediates that come off of degradation and put them right back into brand new proteins. And then mechanisms that allow him to keep that upregulated and keep his metabolism upregulated. And so, here you are trying to figure out how Wolverine can heal himself. And what you're learning about is mechanisms of protein turnover and keeping cells viable. And who to thunk it, right? These grad students are not really necessarily going in with the intention of trying to learn basic physiology. They're just trying to figure out what keeps Wolverine alive, and yet they've come out of this experience with a whole lot more knowledge than they thought they were going to get.
Well, and it comes back to what you said at the beginning. This is a way for them to use their intellectual muscles yes, it's a fictional state, and everyone will agree it's a fictional state, but it's a fictional application that actually can have real world learning implications for these students, and it's an amazing educational opportunity for them. So as we wrap up, because we're running out of time here, as you know, being a veteran of the podcast, we give our speakers a opportunity to do a take-home message for our audience. What would be your take-home message for the folks that are watching this podcast?
Wow. I think I've done this a few times, but, and I might have to repeat myself here. I think the take-home message, and I've been doing a lot of work around my home over the last few weeks, and it harkens back to my construction days. And anytime I think of construction days, I think very fondly of my dad. And my dad made a comment to me once, and because I told him, I really want to learn this stuff. I want to really go into this field and of physiology. And he goes, well, son, the easiest way to keep something forever is to give it away. And I looked at him like he was crazy. What are you talking about? If I really want it badly, how in the world do you think it's going to benefit me to give it away? And I didn't really appreciate it until I got into instruction and being a teacher. What he meant is that if I know something so fundamentally well that I can communicate that to my students so that they can learn something, I will keep that forever. And in essence, what he was telling me is, yes, the students benefit, but I benefit too as an instructor by learning something so much that I cherish and giving that away. I keep it forever.
That is a great take-home message and profound. And I think that's what drives so many great teachers, just what you just said. That's
well,
how
I hope so. I hope that, I mean, that should be the mission statement, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it's a great mission statement and a great elaboration on why we do the podcast for. And Jim, I want to thank you so much for your time today. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time to be with us, to find out what makes a great teacher tick and some of the things that we do at the university to help our students learn. Some of you may have thought this was silly at the beginning, but it's really serious. We're very serious about our education and our students' educations. And sometimes it's a lot of fun what we do. And that's what we try to do with it. And Dr. Fluckey is a great example of that. So again, great to have you with us, Jim, and great to have all of you tuning in with us today. Again, we hope that all of you are staying healthy during this time. Again, remember, please wash your hands, cough into your elbows, practice social distancing, and stay active. Again, there's a link right down here at the bottom that gives you a direct link right into the American College of Sports Medicine guidelines for exercising during the pandemic. We encourage you to do so you can stay active and healthy during the pandemic. We'll see you next time. So if you were asked the question, who would win in a fight between Iron Man and Batman, who would you pick?
I'm going to go with Batman. Again, you know, Iron Man's toys fail. I mean, with Iron Man's got his toys. Batman has some toys too, but when he's got his toys, it's amazing. Yeah. But when those toys fail, you have to go back to human prowess, right? And Batman was in the League of Assassins. Okay, this guy is a very formidable human being, even without the toys. And I think people forget that.